Okay, this is my actually great. Really appreciate it. Comment about. You've heard me. Normally I wouldn't harp on it so much. We just had 3 months.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. I was anybody? Yes. Oh, Jason. This is one that added in.
Oh yeah, you have to deal with that. It's like marketing and whatnot. It's like getting a live stream.
Yeah. Okay, so you get down where you want channel.
So it should be live. I should be able to watch it.
But I've been watching the EFF.
Where are you going to sit?
I was going to talk about watching the
You're the speakers. You don't sit right here. What's your name again?
how they were built. I was very impressed.
And Bill's a long time.
Are you sitting in there?
I'm doing the live streaming for you
We'll
guys.
just double check that it's
I
working.
kind of know a little bit.
Yeah, is it? I might.
We're just checking.
A little live icon next to it.
Yeah, I'm seeing you facing me. Right?
Okay, so
It's a little behind out there.
Yeah, it's about a 30-second delay
Right,
on that.
I'm seeing it's working. I'm seeing it come over and talk to you. One final concern I have is that one time the screen worked, but basically it didn't actually get saved and the ether ate it. So I guess just we can make sure that the screen will actually get saved.
So these ones have memory cards in them now, so as they're streaming, they're actually saving to
They are not just caching it, they are live saving it. So when there's a power loss or a RAM or a save problem, it saves as it goes.
Correct.
You literally have to have the building power go out.
Correct.
Not save.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Alrighty. If you have any problems, just go ahead and text me, whatever. I'm about to leave it set.
I'm reassured.
Awesome. Have a good one, man.
The rest of humanity with Microsoft gained some phenomenon that are going well.
Since then, Doug is working now. It's does work for us.
That's exactly what you're doing in my
Soon to turn over the name of the back. I mean, I just read it like a month ago.
I need a relationship versus understanding.
That's going to be freaking tough.
It's an ongoing not going to
Right. You finally got a product, so you take off and probably change some parts.
In about 2 minutes we'll get started.
My assertion
This is new. I like to get everybody's names.
Right,
That's,
because you're
first.
actually, you're going to find out something.
Yeah.
Right, so you're, this is a.
well, it's like,
Software engineer. I've been
you probably
HP for a while.
do that, but at some point you're going to break out the and that means that, in my mind, I have
for money. I love that's my money job.
and then you finally get to the point where you've got the general
True life's work.
Okay, if you go back and
Yeah, I've been on
track your way back through
just getting back in
whatever.
now. So it's been, I wish I had more of that side
Southwest,
thing going on.
and you watch the
Yeah,
videos.
I need to.
the side hustle. I like
Yeah.
to
Yeah, because what he did was he unwrapped this and mapped it
Because I was
into,
focused on the job.
this is.
That would
Oh, that's wow.
Yeah, put all that time into
But the
it.
cool thing that he did
Yeah, I was actually there.
was
I was
that he
20.
mapped the chasm,
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, I know, that was,
right?
I was actually there for like 20
Right,
years.
and this is
Yeah,
where
well,
here.
they wanted more, they wanted me to Houston to be with the more senior
Right, but
management.
yeah, it'd be one of those, this is what you use for.
Want to move to Houston.
And it's interesting is
Oh yeah, you guys just say come. It's good to see you again.
I've only known him since kindergarten.
Well, I bumped into him in conversation on the screen of the 0 days last Thursday, and I told him we should come out. And he's like, "Oh, my friend is."
It's nice.
All right.
Oh, I didn't know you.
And
Well, I will give a few opening remarks and then I'll turn it over.
I'm a huge fool.
You man.
I think we're going to probably go ahead and get started here. Okay, welcome everyone to the EFF-Austin monthly meetup. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of EFF-Austin for those of you who are new or first-timers. We had a 1-month hiatus because it was South by and we were having our annual Cyberpunk party, which was a lot of fun. And we will continue to try to throw this for you guys. But welcome back, everyone. Just so you can go over a few brief announcements of what's up in the EFF-Austin world. Currently, the monthly meetup spot in May is open, so if you or somebody you know might be interested in speaking on a topic relevant to EFF-Austin, get at me. Let's see. Also, EFF-Austin, in our ongoing political work and trying to expand our scope and effectiveness in that arena, we are currently interested in locating a good nonprofit lawyer who might be interested in doing a little bit of pro bono work for us for the cause. So if you have any recommendations on that front, get with me as well later. Later this month, we are going to be facilitating, not directly through EFF-Austin, but a number of the board members are going to be facilitating that Shahid Buttar used to be with EFF in San Francisco, and he has currently left EFF because he is basically running for Congress. He's specifically challenging Nancy Pelosi from the left on surveillance abuse, reauthorization of FISA, NSA surveillance, things like that. He's a longtime friend of ours, and we definitely, although we don't officially endorse campaigns here at EFF-Austin, certainly he is a friend of ours, and we are probably going to, when he's in town, be organizing some sort of event/fundraiser for him in our capacity as private citizens. So if anybody is interested in knowing more about that, we will have some announcements about that. Let's see, any final things I need to go over? That's what's occurring off the top of my head. As always, you can find news about what we're up to on our website, EFF-Austin.org. We're also on Meetup, Facebook, Twitter. We have a mailing list. We have a Slack. We post Reddit announcements. So wherever you get your news best, you can stay up to date with us. Okay, so I'm now going... Oh, and final thing, I also like to, at the beginning of meetups, make space for any community announcements. So if there's any news anybody here would like to share with the community that is germane to interests of EFF-Austin followers, feel free to bring it up. Shameless self-promotion is encouraged. So if it's just anything you think people in this room might be interested in knowing is happening, anybody got something? Nope. Okay, I'm going to now introduce our speaker this month. I'm very honored that we have Glenn Smith with us this month. I was introduced to Glenn via one of my fellow board members and former president John Lipkowski, who suggested that Glenn has been going around giving some very interesting talks, and he thought it'd make an excellent subject for our meetup. Glenn is a journalist, consultant, think tank thinker. He's an author of The Politics of Deceit. He's a writer for The Statesman and Quorum Report. He used to write for Huffington Post. He's been in Texas Observer. He's done a lot of cool stuff as a journalist. He's also been a senior fellow at the Rockridge Institute in Berkeley with cognitive scientist George McCobb. He's co-authored several papers with him that are relevant to the stuff he's going to be talking about with us tonight, specifically the power of framing when it comes to the reporting of news and of our political conversation. Specifically, how the word choice we use matters in the debates we can have with each other about what we believe and how we should conduct policy in our society. Specifically, Glenn has been exploring a new trend in the news business, which, you know, if you follow the sort of stuff that EFF-Austin followers tend to care about, you may already know about. There's been an increasing trend that for short copy, for essentially programs to write these articles now. They're basically AI templates that will, you know, you feed them in some data about a news story and they'll spit out a basic little story about it. And the question basically is, how does this affect framing of the news and what are the implications for our political discourse of this practice? And that's where Glenn comes in. So I'm going to turn these over to Glenn here.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm happy to be here with you. This is fun. It's going to be fun. The topic, when I get into it, So it's experimental talk I'm going to give, so no ideas as much as you're going to hear in my introduction. So how Kevin described it.
You are welcome to go wherever the stage.
Well, because I think for a new one, I thought on what to do about this. So why don't I get going, and then I can finish this, and we'll interrupt me anytime too. Should be as freewheeling as we possibly can. So I'll start with a quote. Quote, "This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has refinements, technological advancements, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of human freedom." You know who said that? Rod Serling said that, introducing an episode called The Obsolete Man in 1961. Quote's very relevant to where we are today. The title has a contemporary ring to it. Just today, this very day, by the way, you may know Facebook started sending notices to 87 million Americans about how their personal data was stolen, scraped, and used in attempts to alter their views and beliefs about the world and the country. We're going to start by talking about another dangerous development, though. Should be fun. We're going to talk about the consequences of the increasing role of commercial metrics, algorithms, analytics, and search engine gamesmanship, and the composition of news reports and analysis. Not in the collecting, not in the aggregating, but in their actual composition. Refinements or technological advancements, you might call them. We better discuss what they mean for freedom. I want to tell you how I came across this issue, which I really wasn't aware of with all my talk about the country on language framing. News media, their financial future, far from secure and hungry for readers and viewers, are hooking eyeballs by shaping content around popular words. Terms and frames is chosen by machine analytics. Use of analytics by media is not yet universal, but it is growing. What does composition by analytics mean? I'm going to give you a simple example, and it's an example I was discussing on framing with a group of international journalists, most American and some overseas. How some on the anti-tax side of things will use the term death taxes to stand in or substitute for inheritance taxes, and it ought to be immediately apparent why they would call those death taxes. The negative associations, entailments is the linguistic term for it, with death taxes. Government wants to tax our very deaths and keep taxing us after we die. Inheritance is good, death is bad. So they want to use that frame, death taxes, instead of inheritance. It's been going on a long time. You've probably seen it in the fights or biannual fights. But death taxes is spin, it's propaganda. It's used on purpose to mold opinion. Not around some rational idea of let's discuss what to do with these taxes, but to make people think, first of all, it's a burden and it's bad. So what I suggested to this group of journalists, I'll talk more about it in a minute, that they may want to see through terms like death taxes and at least put them in context, if not use another term like the official term inheritance taxes. What I got back was, especially by the way, the young people who are doing dynamic work at the Atlantic's online city map, which I highly recommend if you're not already reading it. They're the ones that first told me in this group that their editors have begun changing their copy based on the returns from analytics. So even if they wanted to use the right frame, if death taxes was getting searched for more often, it was going to be death taxes.
Clickbait.
Excuse me?
Clickbait.
Well, exactly. So you could, I mean, it's ultimately, we go on with this, I mean, that could get worse and worse and worse. But let me keep going. I went on and searched death taxes, and it got 1,070,000 for death taxes and 41,800 for inheritance taxes in the news category. And good news was that people were doing an actual legal search, like a loved one had died, and they wanted to see what was going on. Inheritance outscored death by 6.4 million to 3.1, so there is a silver lining there. These people are still searching for inheritance taxes under some circumstances, but it's way behind in the news category. Meaning that death taxes have an enormous advantage on getting reported. The bad news is that the world of politics, inheritance taxes will be transformed into death taxes, calling to mind government rules, robbing your loved one's grave to steal what rightfully belongs to you. It is hardly a neutral term. But look at it like this. Remember paint by numbers?
Yep.
To make a pretty picture, simply paint inside the lines pre-selected paint colors that match the tiny numbers within the lines. Imagine that everyone follows the rules just as you do. Paint by numbers or paint by machine journalism will be something like the paint by numbers kits. In reality, simplified, dumbed down, and made to look like the most powerful want it to look. Here I got to stop in a brief confession. When I got into politics as a consultant, and I worked for Lloyd Bentsen, so you know, and then worked for Bill Hobby, who was Lieutenant Governor back in the 90s, from the 70s to the 90s. And then for Ann Richards in the 1990 campaign. And as a communications specialist, manager of the primary campaign, I can tell you the term at the time that was dominant in the consultant field in politics was dumb it down. We've got to dumb it down. I'd say we pretty much dumbed it down about as far as we can dumb it down today. But it's how techno-marketing can alter our perceptions of the real world. And when we base our actions on those altered perceptions, the tactics change the real world. Even if the term leads to confusion or a lack of understanding, it's going to be used if it's already more popular. So it's like a feedback loop, a negative feedback loop, or a vicious cycle. Now, human communicators, and I was one in journalism for many years before I got to all this. Of course, we use words and language that people would be familiar with under most circumstances. We wanted to be understood. We didn't want to speak in an unfamiliar code or private language or jargon. We avoided it when we could. Choosing words based on familiarity and understanding is an obvious necessity. So maybe the use of aggregated data and analytics is just a refinement, or, as Rod Serling put it, a technological advancement and extension of the old world, and not something we should sweat. However, our language choices require our thought and creativity. If I had to give the message I wanted you most to take away tonight is to think about discernment, thought, and creativity in both our consumption of information and communicating ourselves. There's a couple of authors who recently, Franklin Ford, in his new book, World Without End, said this: the tech companies are destroying something precious, which is the possibility of contemplation. The possibility of contemplation. They've created a world in which we're constantly watched and always distracted. Through their accumulation of data, they have constructed a portrait of our minds, which they use to invisibly guide mass behavior and increasingly individual behavior at that, to further financial interests. Well, you can see if they're already doing that, and we spoke a little while ago, I imagine the conversation will get to this aggregation of data in the Facebook debacle, etc. You can see what's happening, but that's being accelerated by them using the language you've already indicated you want to hear and understand. It's sort of going to build on itself and become more and more influential inside your head, even if you don't know it. That was Franklin Ford. Jonathan Taplin also has a new book called Move Fast and Break Things: How Facebook, Google, and Amazon cornered culture and undermined democracy. He's just as blunt. I called him after reading that book because this was also new to me about the use of analytics to actually compose the news. And his answer was blunt. I agree, data will be the death of creative thought. That's a pretty startling thing to say. It seems it must be too extreme to be true. Surely it won't come to that. The destruction of human contemplation, the death of creative thought. Ford and Taplin are sober-minded cultural observers. They're not given to hyperbole. They're not extremists. Either one of them. Are their concerns justified? So here's where I ran into this. I spoke recently to a group of journalists in the was put together by the City University of New York under a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, and mainly it was environmental journalists. And I was using cognitive science George Lakoff's example of tax relief. So anti-tax advocates use tax relief to for pretty obvious reasons because of its associations and entailments, right? So what do you think of when you hear the word relief?
Good thing.
Mhm.
It's a good thing.
It's a relief because it's got to relieve something, right? It's like a
Something
burden
suppressive.
or an illness.
It's a positively emotionally charged word.
Yes, it
It's
is
a
that.
framework.
Which is why they use tax relief. Listeners immediately think of burdens, pains, harms, and other things we need relief from. So, taxes is defined as just such a burden. Automatically, that's the way the mind works with language. Entailments, by the way, and this is a great example of framing. It's unconscious, and it's hard to interrupt. In fact, it can never be erased. We can wire around it, but this has to do with neuronal connections that happen as a word gets used more and more often for a term, and the more often it's used, the more accustomed, like where's a rut in your brain, and your mind goes there. You can wire around it, but you can't erase it. And that's the way frames work. Brief digression here. It actually came from Irving Goffman in sociology, who used framing to mean a social situation that brought with it certain entailments that were automatic in our thinking. And one great example was a hospital. So when you go to a hospital, you've already in your mind determined the sort of drama and the frames and the language to expect. You don't expect the admissions officer to do the surgery. You don't expect the janitor to be the nurse, right? You expect the surgeon to do the surgery. You expect the admissions officer to admit you. You expect the surgery to be done not in the lobby, but in the surgical center. All those things are part of the frame drama in your head automatically. So when you think of hospital, they're there, unconsciously, automatically, and nearly instantly. And that's how frames work. Well, the journalists understood this immediately. They work with language all the time. They were interested. But they were quick to tell me that if tax relief showed up as a more used term than tax cut, then editors are likely going to insert it in their copy. Or it might be done automatically in certain cases. Many journalists are alarmed at this turn to composition by analytics. There's a recent study by a woman named Angela Christin, C-H-R-I-S-T-I-N, Angela, Stanford. And she's found, with a kind of international look, that many journalists are actively opposing their management on the use of analytics, which is good news, I take it, at least for the moment. Kristen found that, quote, the hopes that managers invest in data-driven techniques and the descriptions they provide of algorithmic use often diverge from what takes place among their employees, and many algorithms are either ignored or actively resisted. Journalists drag their feet or simply ignore the analytics tools forced on them by management. The journalists I met with in New York weren't doing that and didn't know if they could get away with it. If you look at the state of journalism now, that resistance is kind of a dangerous thing. Yeah.
So as I was coming here tonight, I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about the Denver Post, right? And the issue there is that it's been bought up by a capitalist fund, and they are extracting the money and laying people off, and there is less and less real news content in it, to the point where it's not really contributing to the community. It's just a vehicle for driving the revenue extraction.
It's a frightening thing, and all journalists are worried about it. They worry about the longevity of their job wherever they are. They worry about their careers, period, because they don't know if there'll be a next place to move to.
To the point that the editor of the opinion page written his own editorial on this commentary in his own newspaper about his own owner.
Oh, wow. It's a scary time for it. There's another story out today, just to give you an idea of what journalism can accomplish or fail to accomplish under certain circumstances. Politico. Do y'all read Politico? You know, it's a national political online, been around for just a few years now. They finally done a really long national study on something I'm really glad they took a look at, which is what happens to political beliefs in those parts of the country with little or no access to new independent news sources. Their local papers have
They voted for
degraded.
Trump, is what they.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. here in Texas years ago, y'all might remember the controversy surrounding Tom DeLay and his mid-decade redistricting of congressional districts. And the people that worked for him wound up in some legal troubles. He wound up in some legal troubles and wound up on Dancing with the Stars after he had to resign because of it. Well, it was an ongoing and a pretty big controversy. And even as late as 2006, in polls here and in the urban areas around Texas, it still showed up as a major negative for Republican candidates. I was surprised at that because I didn't think people paid that much attention to redistricting, honestly. But it was big enough news in the urban areas where it was still a negative. When people associated with DeLay had high negative numbers because of it, except in the smaller rural markets where they didn't know who Tom DeLay was, didn't know what redistricting was, knew nothing about the scandal. Because it hadn't been reported to them. It wasn't their fault. Their local news affiliates, the ones that remained, were no longer reporting news like that. Their newspapers had largely been reduced to shoppers in so many places, so they just didn't have access to it. Now, they're going to be easy marks for this kind of thing, right? Those markers are going to be quite easy for this to take its toll because they won't even have to bother with going through independent writers. They'll just go into the paid content. So I give journalists, I give them more than a break, actually. They understand the competitive need to recruit loyal followers and readers in the new world of online journalism. Their money's going to come from there, after all. So they have to be so pure and so independent that they draw up all the revenue. They know that. They want their outlets to be financially successful. But how do they resist, short of fighting the fight as long as they can? Or let's assume they successfully do, say it's CityLab or the Atlantic. Well, what happens when they lose the click fight because of it? What happens when a competitor comes in that's not quite so conscientious? And all of a sudden CityLab's still not making money today, but it makes it losing even more money than it's losing today. The journalists, like most of us, don't paint by numbers when they can paint by hand, heart, and their own wits. We're biologically driven to create an imperative the bean counters might not fully comprehend. We're not only driven to create, we're driven to the created and the creative. Scientists have not yet nailed down exactly how creative thought takes place. And this gets to what I was teasing about AI a moment ago. They're getting close. And they know the neural mechanisms involved appear to be far different from the absolutely deterministic algorithms that return one answer and one answer only when asked. For instance, what term is currently most popular among readers of the news in a given field? Our minds don't do that, thankfully. We quit reading a long time ago and writing. Divergent thinking, made possible by constrained but not fully determined neural networks that assist us in creating new ideas. We may not know where they come from. In fact, writers often don't know where their ideas come from, and they say as much. Or Bob Dylan claims his lyrics come out of the air. He doesn't know how they get there. But machine-driven analytics are never going to do that. And they're never going to solve a problem that they didn't know existed when they were created. This is what Jonathan Taplin is pointing to when he speaks of the death of creative thought. And it's what Franklin Foer is pointing to when he speaks of the destruction of contemplation. To be fair, even some of the proprietors of the analytic system, largely the publishers, agree that human intervention remains essential. So even people that are selling these services to news outlets, and there's plenty of giant global companies now that are doing that, by the way. One is this guy, Andrew Montalenti, at a company called Parse.ly. And he said data-informed decision-making is also about making judgments, not blindly following the latest real-time performance indicator. I might argue that real journalists were already making those judgments. Like I said earlier, we already knew that we had to use somewhat familiar terms. Right? We couldn't just pick jargon out of the science lab and expect readers to understand what we were talking about. So is it just an idle boast he's making about this sort of post-analytics intervention where human judgment would again play a role? Maybe that just meant to pacify or comfort journalists resisting composition by analytics. On the other hand, maybe he really wants to promote newsroom arguments over whether to use the algorithmically returned popular word or the word that produces the best understanding. In today's journalism, what happens to the writer, devoted to understanding and originality, who simply refuses to compose by analytics? Are her stories less popular? Does management take note and discipline her? Does her outlet suffer economically? There's a parallel here to the long-standing debate about the virtues of analog sound and the recording over digital. I kind of like this one. It doesn't directly apply, but because the Austin guy told me about it long ago. Y'all know Ray Benson, the musician, asleep at the wheel. Many, many years ago, as digital recording began to take over sound studios, Ray invented a device to reintroduce the analog signal. And they did these studies to prove the marketability of that device. But they put people in isolated focus group rooms. One room listened to the digital playback and one listened to the analog playback, and they told the people they could leave whenever they grew uncomfortable and wanted to leave. So of course all the people in the digital sound room left, and the people in the analog room stayed, because the analog was so much more comfortable to the human ear and brain. This has something in common with that. I think we're going to be able to tell digitally produced. One way we're going to be able to know it is because it's going to dumb down even further and further and further. We're going to notice the repeated use of certain words and terms and the lack of a unique viewpoint on this or that.
I hope you're right, but I fear that our machines are sitting smarter than that. Like, when it becomes repetitive and they say that we don't like repetitive, they'll start being more dynamic. I feel like that's a losing battle, trying to find this machine's intelligence in terms of being able to see what's popular and react to it.
It's interesting that you phrase that, because I was sort of thinking of a similar counterpoint where I was like, if it's trying to promote what's popular and there is a certain demographic for whom intelligence, sophistication, or the appearance of it is what's popular, maybe you have a feedback loop of an algorithm that is trying to write ever more and more wordy and erudite articles that still aren't really saying anything, but are just trying to sell to those of us who think we're too clever and woke to fall for these algorithms.
Yes.
So there's a big piece of everything that's gone on with computers, and that's been disintermediation, right? Which is this whole thing about you don't need other people to carry the load, right? You go directly to the producer and consumer. And so for those people that are trying to get a specific message out, right, not having it being interpreted by the news people, the journalists, right, allows them to have their message arrive at the destination unfiltered.
Yes, it's even worse, really, if they employ this tactic or suite of tactics, because there's nobody in the newsroom to even step back and go, wait a minute, let me present this in another way.
But isn't that a filter?
It's a water filter.
Yeah, that's the journalism schools, right? What you say when you write a story.
Well, yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
And they make mistakes.
Or they could be framing it separate. My take is that we're going to evolve, as we have with the rest of English, of just saying, okay, that's a concept, I've digested it enough that whatever you say, now let me hear the argument, let me hear the words. Let me hear the logic, I'm sorry, I'm speaking as an engineer. In engineering, we know that if we mistake 4 for 5, that bridge is going to collapse, or whatever it is.
It's Bill, right?
Yep. There's
Wayne?
the creative versus the engineer. That's my model.
Your comments are related, and that's maybe it's really what I would like to explore.
I'm an engineer as well, so I don't know if that helps.
Okay, so there's an enormous amount of work that's been over the last 50, 60, 70 years that we don't think that way. That we're not led by rational thought all the time, and a lot of our reactions to language are unconscious after a certain period of learning on a given topic or whatever, like we've been talking about. So that the question becomes, where is the interruption that gives us the space to think like we're built to think, which is our brains are not computers. Emotions play an enormous role in our beliefs. And in order, and that could be a strength, it could be a weakness. The question is, how do we use it to stay ahead of that danger that you remarked on, or can we? That's a question.
I mean, it's
But that's
inevitable that we're going in an AI direction to take care of mundane journalism jobs, and mundane is a tough word there. I mean, any journalist can decide. The one I was thinking of when you talked about inheritance tax, even a human journalist has to decide whether to use chain migration or family reunification when talking about migration. But that's a choice on the point of view of the human journalist, and I mean, the Statesman just got sold. Who knows what's going to happen there? AI is going to do it. How do you do it well? Still keep the editorial by thinking human beings, and I mean, it's a problem with Sinclair. It's a problem everywhere of how to manage the information we get. But I think the AI is just unstoppable.
And I think you're getting to what I think the question always starts becoming is, all human beings bring bias. We can't help but do it. And so the question is, what is the difference between responsible journalistic bias and, to use a term I hate, fake news?
Well, it depends on the data pipeline that the AI is operating on. If the data pipeline is built with an ethical intent, that's a very loose term, then it's going to collect information in an ethical way and, produce it in an ethical way. But if someone's designing it for the sake of promoting a perspective, it's going to devolve as task.
But there's so many other factors that are making me try to conserve, make more efficient my thinking. I'm getting more stuff at me, I'm aging, I have more things that I've got this classified in my head, and I can't place code switching. So I just know each group's got its own word for the same concept. The concept doesn't change. The mathematics of your of inheritance tax and et cetera, or the difference in whether it's a tax decrease or cut, whatever, and tax relief, I just know what I've got as a tax, and I'm going to continue on with the money I have, however you want to name how I got there.
Well, you're smarter than the average bear. Right? So right now, seriously, that seriously.
We're not going to have to sandwich this because we must all be liberal arts people.
But let me suggest that right now, inheritance taxes, somebody might know that they only apply now to like top 3, 5, 7% of Americans. Period. Nobody has enough money to have to pay inheritance taxes.
Doesn't it even not hit you at all unless there's more than 10 million in inheritance?
Something like that.
11 million for a couple.
But your average fellow doesn't know that, and they hear death taxes, and to them the negative of death taxes overrides any subsequent thinking. They may put pencil to paper and go, I wonder if I'll ever owe any of these death taxes. They don't do that. They just oppose it because their emotions take over. Right?
Well, I mean, there's the philosophical argument too, right? It doesn't matter how rich you are, it matters should it be taxes when they die. I do think it should, but I think that people can frame it that way without being, just because it doesn't affect me doesn't mean I don't have an earnest idea about the way that it should be.
There is a reasonable, rational argument to be had around that one both ways, but I interrupted your question.
There may be a group of people that you can use more that usually don't have much engagement. People on the autistic spectrum. They are asymmetrical because they don't pick up on these natural characteristics that a large portion of the population. So they form their own ideas. Sometimes they're kind of screwy, but they come up with different answers, and I think they can be cultivated to be like journalism, if in this case. But they could also be cultivated for anything that's cognitive.
So you're basically saying that a defense potentially against algorithmic framing is cultivating a culture of neurodiversity.
Right, and, you know, it's about 1.5 to 2% of the population, so you'll run into it.
That's an interesting phrase you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, would you repeat the phrase just so that we think about it one more time?
Sure, I think all I think is it was that maybe a defense against algorithmic framing is cultivating a culture of neurodiversity.
Neurodiversity.
Yeah. Well, I mean that is the term advocates
Yeah,
often use for
they like to
autism
use
and
that.
other
Or
non-neurotypical
neurodivergence.
ways of the brain being wired.
Well, it's interesting applying it to this. The diversity item that had come to mind as we were going through this conversation was the 17-year-olds in Parkland and the asymmetrical impact they're having.
And actually, one thing that some of the commentary I thought is somewhat astutely pointed out is that, you know, as always, there are hand-wringing fears about how technology is affecting the ability of younger generations to critically think, and then we look at the Parkland students and it's like, well, maybe they're actually thinking better than a lot of the people older than them.
Maybe because they are trying to take out the filters, the code switches.
Well, maybe weirdly enough, being raised with them their whole lives, instead of like actually making it where they don't notice them, maybe they're more attuned to them than we are.
Maybe. My previous remark.
Well, I'm curious to
Or
hear
this
your
is-
thoughts on this. You literally
Yeah.
study Gen Z. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely my impression is that, so whereas we have, you know, traditional journalism, that is a problem, especially for our generation. The younger generations, they get their news in disintermediated ways where they will use YouTube and they will listen to those people who give diverse voices. And actually that landscape has opened up a bit because it used to be that when you had this syndicated media that would have to take so many considerations into, or so many views into considerations and be tolerant to those people who don't want you to talk about global warming in your entertainment or don't want to talk about gender issues in your entertainment. These YouTubers just do it. And then they get these, and there's this raw sounding board of their own identities in many ways. So I think that they are, but then again, this is not the generation that sits on Facebook and answer quizzes because they're not on Facebook. They are in these so-called dark vertical medias, social media, where they communicate, they pick up their groups. But they don't sit there and answer quizzes and let it go all to Russia. They don't do that. They're too smart for that.
Yeah, what's interesting again is that they're delivering their message unfiltered through the typical filters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those that are generating the fake news, the corollary you're pointing out is that anyone, including crazy ladies, who end up going into YouTube because they're upset about their revenue stream, can get their message out to somebody that notices it and then shares that amongst their social group.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that generation that you're speaking of, are they like the music listeners that got up and got out of the digital sound room because they sensed something less pleasurable and meaningful and harder than they would in the analog sound room? Is that what's happening? Is it a natural human reaction against something about those other sources of news that sent them to packing to these other venues? Which would be a positive thing.
It could be. You know, I'm reminded of this thing that's been going around in social media recently where you had different media channels where they read from the same script.
The Sinclair thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, kids are hearing this and they're like, who am I supposed to believe? And then I think they automatically relate to people that they identify with on YouTube. Like when you see somebody who looks like themselves, you can see the ceiling fan and the dog walking behind them. So it's very authentic, at least it seems like that for them.
The lack of a filter is basically that they're seeing, you know, there's the cliche of representation matters, but it does matter. And they see themselves saying these things, somebody who looks like them, they can empathize with, and that's what they're seeking out. They want a highly human empathic experience.
Yes, at least that's one of the trends that I've picked up on with that generation.
That's a positive sign.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, because that's a much less passive role than your typical baby boomer news consumer.
Mm-hmm.
500 channels with nothing on.
Right, exactly. I mean, but it's not easy to give up that passive role because you're so used to it just being served to you.
Yeah.
And you might have just used a word that has something to do with it. It's also cold. So where's the empathy, right? I mean, it could be a very human reaction that's happening. It is so ubiquitous and so exaggerated. You talked about the repetition, somebody mentioned the repetition of frames and words. It may be so obvious to a new generation of people entering this ocean of information that they want to be less passive about it.
Possibly.
Yeah, one of the things that's always bothered me about advertising targeting is that restricts my ability to discover something new, right?
Absolutely.
I go and I look at, socks, and every freaking ad I see for the next 3 weeks is about socks. It's like, well, I'm done with socks. I'm ready to move on, right?
I think, yeah, it's,
But that's
even ignoring the quibbles that some of us may, probably a lot of us have with ad-driven revenue models, and probably a lot of us with just certain capitalist structures in general when it comes to the internet and information. I mean, yeah, it's like, it might be more tolerable if these ad algorithms actually were good at their jobs. They're not. They don't know you're done with socks.
Yeah, that's right. They don't know what done with
I would
socks.
do a survey to tell them what I want to see, and I would put the time into it so I don't see crap or less crap.
I don't know though. I mean, but as we saw at Cambridge Analytica, there's people who might be very interested in your real opinions about things, because they think that they can then predict other things about you.
In the old days, I was mentioning this earlier too, we called it cluster marketing. And that was the analog version of what's going on. And here's the way we did it. And it was in commercial advertising long before politics. So I would go to your neighborhood. I'd be looking for votes in your neighborhood because maybe you're a swing precinct, right? And I want to know what's motivating the people in that neighborhood. And if you go a Ford Mustang, I could predict that there were going to be other people in your neighborhood that drive Ford Mustangs because people tend to do what their neighbors do. They have houses like their neighbors. Their kids go to school like their neighbors. They eat the same food. They buy the same cars. In cluster marketing, you can predict behavior based on where somebody lives. And you can even begin to predict outcomes about products they didn't even know existed when you did this study. Or, in our case, political issues or candidates. That was the analog version of it, and it was pretty sophisticated when we only knew 2 or 3 pieces of information about your neighborhood, not even about you. Now we can match that up against a telephone poll and see how close we were, and then we could revise what we learned from that poll and go back to your neighborhood and push it a little bit and see if we didn't learn more and get a little bit more data points, 5 or 6. Well, now on Facebook, whether you know it or not, it's not unusual for them to have 15,000 data points.
Oh,
There's no end to how many they can extrapolate about you.
Oh, and 15,000 campaigns.
How many people have gone to Facebook and downloaded their stream?
Yeah.
Oh, even better, I've gone to the section where they've decided what targeted ads they think I want, and I've literally gone in and manually deleted the over 500 things they thought
Yeah,
I
then
was
they
interested in.
they fill it up again.
Oh yeah, and of course, there's no auto remove all of them. They force you to manually delete them all.
And 2 clicks for every delete.
Yep.
Now, this is a frightening thought to me, because, all right, so in the book that he mentioned I wrote back in 2004, it was called The Politics of Deceit. What I did is I went through political practices sort of one at a time and spoke about their deleterious effects. But the internet use was pretty new in 2003 or 2004. And not long after that book came out, well, I sent the galleys, in fact, to the founder of MoveOn.org, and he loved it because I had this utopian idea about what it was going to mean, and he said, I gave you a chapter on that to my father. He now understands what I do. I was pretty proud. But look, Facebook's a good example, though I think it has been true of most of the venues in social media. They look like they're great avenues for individual thought and assertiveness in the greater social world. And what has in fact happened is it has given information on us that's had the exact opposite effect. It has collapsed our individuality in the clusters that can be exploited for this commercial or political reason. And it is so 180 degrees from where I thought it was going that it's rather frightening to consider how we get out of it.
The thing that I've been mostly gotten my mind around is that we've moved from one person, one vote to $1, one vote. At least it feels that way.
Is that all it is? Oh.
It kind of is that way.
Yeah, but
Then
my
that's
pile of
cheaper
dollars is
than I
a lot
thought it
smaller
was.
than my pile of dollars is a lot smaller than some.
It kind of is that way.
So there'll be cryptocurrency.
But what do y'all think? It's sort of like, I know so many people, I mean, people aren't going to get on Facebook. Maybe the new generation's not using it much, so maybe generationally it kind of loses a
It'll
little
shift to
bit.
something else that's.
Yeah, something else will
I
come
mean,
along.
I think, yes, both because new generations aren't as into Facebook and there's been all these scandals. I think Facebook has probably peaked in new users. I even think over the next decade or two they are going to slowly shed users, but I don't see it going away, no. As much as a lot of people think this will finally be the thing that gets
But
rid of
something
it.
else will replace it with the model of, look at the stuff you can do for free. Oh, by the way we're making money is to sell you stuff.
Well, and I mean, like, look,
There's no way around it.
I'm the president of EFF-Austin. I am hugely critical of Facebook, obviously. I'm not at all surprised by these scandals, etc. I haven't deleted my account yet because it is fulfilling a genuine social utility to me. I mean, just from virtue of it makes my job running this easier, frankly, paradoxically. But, if there was an alternative, but that's the thing, people have tried alternatives. Multiple times people have been like, I'm going to kill Facebook with insert idea. Problem is, until you get something that delivers all the goods of Facebook, minus all the spying and selling your data, that everyone is on, that reaches critical mass, because that's the real thing they have. They managed to be successful long enough that the whole planet's on there. No other service can compete with that utility of everyone I know is on there. So if I want to get a message out,
What's
there
the
it
Chinese
is.
app that does that?
WeChat?
WeChat.
But they do
Interesting
everything.
enough.
Yeah.
I politically obviously can tell that I come a little bit from the left, just so y'all can tell where I come from. And so recently, at one conference or another, in speaking to those on the right, they're very quick and very defensive to say that, for instance, Cambridge Analytica had no impact on the outcome of the election. They don't really know the scope of what went on yet, but they're really quick to say, whatever it was. Well, the logical corollary to that will be, if that's the case, none of these people or their candidates will use social media as advertising or political campaigns, because it actually has no effect. If they really believe that, but they can't possibly, but they do believe it, because their mind can't come to grips with the fact that it may actually have manipulated American human thought in a way that helped skew an election one way or the other.
It's all situational. If it had been Hillary's camp doing
Yeah,
it.
but
Oh, then they
also,
thought.
well, the same people would also be like, being like, if you tried to say, well, then I guess Hillary's emails had no effect on the election, they'd instantly reject that and be like, of course that mattered.
Well, this is part of something that has been true that I want to put on the table for a long time. Like nobody, maybe all of us now, because we're so aware of these issues that we can admit that we have been manipulated through the course of our lives by advertising. But most people's attitudes and research decade after decade was, I'm not, because I'm too rational. It's everybody else that's buying these cornflakes and doesn't know they're being made to buy these cornflakes. I'm buying them because I like them. It's my personal choice.
I could quit anytime I want
And I can
to.
quit anytime, that's right. And the same thing I think is happening, well, it may be exaggerated now, because the stakes, forget the particular political outcome, the stakes are really, really high. It's not cornflakes. So how do you admit that an intervention like may have happened from a foreign country, or it could have been a domestic company, who cares at the moment in this hypothetical question? How do we come to grips with it and deal with it
And
culturally?
And I think an important aspect there to remember is before we get tempted to fall into the partisan trap here, that question applies to whether you're on the extreme left or right. Like, remember, it's been somewhat reported, but don't forget that the Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll farm, one of the, I thought most devious things they pulled was in Houston, they created fake events for both, a pro and anti-Black Lives Matter rally, simultaneously. They were running the Facebook groups for both sides. And interestingly enough, it's not just been the duped conservatives who've been oh no, I wasn't duped, that was real. The far leftists who were duped are just as resistant of saying, no, that was real and you're just against Black Lives Matter. They don't want to admit they were duped.
Definitely got to stay on the partisan.
But they've also now got data about those two groups of people.
Yes.
Did you see breaking news today? The biggest Black Lives Matter site on Facebook was a fraud. Some guy in Australia that had 700,000 followers, about twice what the official Black Lives Matter site had. And he collected about $100,000 in donations.
Now this is going to sound like the partisan outcome was what it was. So certainly, let's pretend it went the other way. We had the same sort of human reaction to this phenomenon, speaking of when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of George W. Bush in 2000. Whatever the facts of that matter are, the Supreme Court basically chose the president. And the country said okay, because cognitively we couldn't cope with the idea that it was all screwed up. And we said, all right, this is better than the uncertainty.
Well, I think
and that's what I worry about today, is just saying, oh, whatever it was, it's better than the uncertainty I feel if you're really asking me to cope with this as an individual, right? Yeah.
In many ways, I think what you're talking about is that these individuals have learned how to manipulate our dopamine levels.
Our what?
Our dopamine, our neurotransmitters that give us sensation, that tell us what we have beat. And and they keep playing that. So they're going for a very basic part of our brain that is maybe even like the limbic system, where it is not in possession of any abstractions.
They want to play with the reptile.
What? They can do that too. And then that's the fear thing. That's the amygdala.
It's been going on a long time.
Oh yeah, well, we have had this brain for hundreds of thousands of years. We have plenty of chance to study it.
So how do you resist it? How do you resist it?
That's what our front.
I have I don't know if any of you are familiar with Daniel C. Dennett. He's a neuropsychologist, neuroscientist, and philosopher.
I've seen a few of his videos.
What's the name
Interesting
again?
guy.
Daniel C. Dennett.
Okay, I know Daniel Dennett.
I think that recognizing the simple concept of the ontology is the beginning to, I don't know if transcend is the best word, but I guess evolving beyond that mental trap. Because if you can recognize, you're just perceiving the world. It's not anything certain, it's framed. It's all framed, and your brain is interpreting for the sake of survival. Because that's what the brain does. The brain's creating a simulation because for millions of years, that's what it's done, and it learned to do in the evolution. I think that's simply having that knowledge and understanding that the brain is susceptible to these things is the first step towards, moving on. And honestly, these tools, that we're discussing, I consider Facebook, Google, and all these different search engines and algorithms and whatnot, they're tools, and I think it's really up to the individual to, it's judging their, I guess, moral value or whatnot is always on a subjective basis, because my Google timeline is filled with Glenn Greenwald articles and whatnot. I found out about this event because of Facebook. It's because I have the sense to, say, okay, what kind of information do I want consistently being thrown at me? I do have my stupid meme pages that I like thrown at me as well, but, it's a tool, and it's like driving. You wouldn't put an idiot in a car and can't drive and expect them to use it properly. You know what I mean? So I think that, looking at people and understanding how they understand the tools they're using is very important.
Well, you just validated my belief that there's some value in me staying on Facebook.
like a little bit different perspective on that, because I feel like we don't have the capacity to defend ourselves against things that can keep so much data. Because even if Facebook goes away, the data's out there. And those 15,000 data points are just going to keep being added on. And as much as they can target that on you, they can learn with ever-increasing accuracy how to predict what you're going to do. Because we are kind of the eventuality of an algorithm in some ways. I think that the only way to effectively immunize ourselves is either to deny data to the system or to give fake data to sort of like throw them off our tracks. Because I think trying to outsmart them is the fool's errand.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's a battle.
Oh, I do.
And
And I think even if they have good intent, I don't want them controlling
well,
me.
it's not even about intent. So even though we live knowing we're gonna die. I think it's one of those you have to imagine since this is happy situations. You can't. I mean, they're gonna get smarter, and we're gonna have to just counter. And by counter, I don't mean necessarily fight. I just mean stay aware and understand what's being thrown at. I mean,
Yeah.
I try not to see things violently because I get stupid passionate about things. They're rough, so I have to keep balance. So that's how I try to see it.
And and I will say that I'm a computer programmer, but I actually tend to often like to throw cold water on what I like to call the messianic power of AI algorithms. And I think we sometimes get caught in this trap that they're so smart, and it's like they're good at doing a very specific thing, but let's not give them magic powers they don't have. I mean, for God's sake, you can trick a self-driving car to not be able to move by literally drawing a circle of chalk around it. No joke. That would never fool a human. AI is helpless against this simple little trick.
Yes, you had your hand up first. Pick it over there.
Damn, that's that person I forgot.
Okay, go ahead.
I think there's a great paradox though, because I'm about to hold a presentation at my alumni association about using more data analytics in our research, the type of research that we do, which is kind of a social science type of research. And one of the reasons for that is because I believe, first of all, that we don't have access to perfect information, like we just talked about, and also because of our cognitive biases. So that if we use, as researchers, if we use data analytic tools, we will kind of circumvent, we will kind of break out of that filter bubble that we cannot, even though it's kind of superimposed on us, precisely because Google knows us. But if we can break out of that and we do our own data analytics, we can actually get more like a representative sample, we can get more representative information so that we can learn about what's really going on.
Well, you hit on something that's really important, right? So methodologically, you're using them in order to broaden the possibilities for the audience you're speaking of, right? In this other case, exactly the opposite is being done.
Exactly.
So it's a profoundly ethical moment with a lot of meanings that you can deploy this tool towards producing, even multiplying the possibilities for your target audience, which is a far different methodology than it's what we're talking about here. And that's I'm really glad you brought it up because it's very positive.
And then it ties into your point about it's responsible use of the tool,
Yeah.
And
Guns don't kill people.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like I have this saying, and I'm actually going to open up my presentation to say that data analytics don't kill people. Data analytics don't kill elections, but people kill elections. People win.
I find that very humorous, as I do think most of the people in this room. You're definitely going to annoy some people if you make that joke.
Well, I do have to quickly say that all technologies are not neutral, right? It's just not right.
Yeah.
And they come with more potential in some cases for more damage and destruction than creativity and production. It's just a dangerous thing to consider technologies neutral, like they're blessed somehow.
Yeah.
They're not. We invent them, and if we invent them with malice, they're going to have malice.
Well, true. Not technologies may have a moral range based upon the user, but the nature of the technology itself frames the range of morality that can be employed with it.
Where's the corporate profit? That's
What
driving-
meetup are you at? I just said, what meetup are you at, you know?
Well, what I'm saying is that's driving a lot of the use of technology.
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean, in a capitalist society, that will always be the primary driver of the technology. Absolutely.
Well, it's almost the definition of the difference between invention and innovation.
Mm.
Invention is a new thing. Innovation is a new business built around a new thing.
That's a beautiful example of framing right there.
So-
Yeah, tech companies don't invent these days. That's like, sounds very late 19th century. They innovate now.
You, right there, it's Diana, right? Are you Diana?
Yes, I am.
Do you have some thoughts? I mean, I was talking to people that haven't, can't you,
Yeah, there's a few people we haven't heard much from. Do you have any thoughts?
No.
Sorry.
How about you?
Oh, I'm Kathleen. It's my second time here. I think it's all very interesting, but again, I would really like to see focusing on not just, those of us in the room and how we interpret information, but how we can help others and the broader implications. So especially with, the journalism and Facebook.
Do you have some ideas along those lines?
well, where are you moving with this? You're developing an idea, developing a book, developing an advertising technique.
I'm just focus grouping you guys. I'm sorry to tell you, you're like my research subject. I don't
EFF-Austin got paid the bills. Sorry, people.
I think that we've touched on some, but I'd like to talk about it a lot more, a little more depth, because I actually do agree that it's an education issue. I don't think we'll ever win some sort of legislative war or First Amendment battle even to control communications technologies in some way that they can only do this and not that. I think that'd be a fool's errand. I don't think we want it necessarily, because people might use it against us. So I kind of use by the process of elimination, it's almost got to be about the individuals. That's why I was so interested in this new generation. Are they sort of, they may not know what they're doing, but are they, or with the, on the spectrum of people, is there something about that? Is there something about that that's teachable, that's we intervene at the individual level? I also think that perhaps there'll be some tools developed that stand between, say, me and Facebook. There's some sort of like interface thing that's sort of an interrupter or a disruptor.
There's a new plugin from Mozilla to sandbox Facebook.
Oh, really? What's the name of this plugin?
I just saw a reference to it yesterday, I think.
But it basically will prevent the API platform sharing of the nature they expect.
Now, yeah, there's still places that it leaks through, but...
Right, it's always an arms race with these
Right.
third-party plugins.
Yeah, but there is just go look for Mozilla and Facebook, and
Wow.
it's the current topic in those two dimensions. Or
Now
what
the
we would
question
say.
would be politically, will Chrome respond to theirs?
Chrome
Well,
is
you
always in a
have-
weird
You
position
do
on these
have, there
things.
is a store, so someone else could.
Well,
read through the Mozilla
remember
code.
that Mozilla doesn't have a dollar in the game.
Well, yeah, that's why I said what I said.
Well, there's a
Nor
reason I use
necessarily that there isn't collusion going on. That's another
Mm.
train of stuff that you're hearing about, collusion in Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
But of course, that would make it very fascinating. So if you could take the Mozilla code, because I assume it's a GitHub, and change it into a Chrome thing,
Could you get it in the
then I
Chrome
could
store?
get it into the Chrome store. Now the fun would begin. Either Google fights against it, or they go to my security system that says, I get scared whenever these messages come up. We've got it's not a green code. It's not.
Well, yeah,
It doesn't
you're.
get the green thing. So,
Yeah.
but I'd love to see how that goes.
The other issue is that, if you have anonymized data, we talked about this last week, didn't we? If you have anonymized data
Yes.
with, if you've got enough of it, you do the same things over and over again. So when they see someone doing that pattern of things, it's probably you. Even if they don't, all they have to do is have the pattern over here and the pattern over here. They don't even need it directly.
Exactly right. In fact, it's worse than that. If your neighbor's doing that, they figure you're gonna do it.
Well,
It didn't even have to be you. I do have to say, there's an analog version of this that works, by the way, this is lobbyists don't want us to do. So in these days of cluster marketing, a lot of direct mail that you receive use cluster marketing to target your mailbox. And so his way around that wasn't to let less information out there, it was more. So he would subscribe to the Rifleman magazine and bridal magazines and beer magazines. He was everything. And how would they decide exactly what to appeal to him to? Because he was this ubiquitous human race hustler.
So what you're talking about is leaving information for them that give them, let them form a different perspective, or maybe something even incompatible with them.
I don't know, I mean, it's increasing the background noise to where you can't see the signal anymore, basically. And, I mean, it literally reminds me, speaking of like the ease of de-anonymizing, I mean, literally, Corey on Going today shared a fun little article about how, you know, there's about to be all the data privacy protections about to go into place in the EU, basically, and if, you know, and if these big tech companies don't comply, they're actually going to get fined quite seriously, like actually enough they have to kind of care. So they're trying to do these workarounds of claiming things like, oh look, well yes, we have this huge set of emails, but we've hashed it to just random strings and we don't save the original emails, so it's all anonymous. And like Corey's basically like, well, fun thing is that with today's modern computing power, you don't need to know what the originals were because you can literally just take every possible email address, compute what all of them are, and match it up. And this takes like a billionth of a second. So it's not anonymized at all.
You can find the numeric IP address. And that's how they're knowing that I'm in this house in this zip code.
Where's the VPN bill?
Keep going back there.
I keep going back to that house?
Yeah.
That's very suspicious.
I'm so anti the oligopoly.
I fear I told some regular folk that they could watch the streaming thing I was going to do tonight, and I fear some of them maybe jumped out their windows. Based on your internet. Yeah, well, I want to come back and talk a lot about the question you asked. I think it's really important. And like, what does the educational program look like? How does this become part of a sort of regular, people are going to grow up in this world, how do we educate into this world? How does it work?
Yeah.
Well, we should teach them about medieval Europe.
Is that a good question? I've heard about groups that go into schools and teach children about media by training them on, you know, equipment, like how to give interviews, how to write stories, and how to like make their own news segments.
Sure.
And by teaching them that, they're sort of teaching them media literacy. So maybe the idea also could be not only to teach media literacy, but to teach data analytics to children. So they know, they have the weapons in their hands of like how to read and process the information that's given to them.
I mean, that's definitely something we've explored at EFF-Austin. We definitely are big believers in digital literacy and trying to start at a really young age. One thing we would hope to eventually be able to do more of as we hopefully grow and gain more resources is we would like to get more programs to do that sort of thing in place for the local schools, because, you know, there's the question of what ultimately makes somebody the sort of person who is capable enough of seeing their own framing, that they're the sort of person who's here tonight and asking these questions, versus the sort of person on the left or right who, if they find out they've been duped, they don't want to hear it and they've already dug in. And I think educational intervention at a young age is frankly the best answer I have, because I think
There's a potential topic for May.
maybe.
But this is my attitude about the education is pedantic. It's not giving opportunities to discuss on an objective basis. It's become subjective very early. If you guys go out and teach all that, I'll suggest that you're also going to probably put your bias, your framing in it, and you're not giving them a chance. What you see seems to be a good situation with the school bombing. I mean, that, you know, that part, that's Westwood, that's Westwood, that's, okay. They've been told they're independent, think independent. That's what I interpret as that school district.
In Florida?
I think it's Boca Raton, I know. It was a
School shooting, you said school
You're
shooting.
talking about Parkland?
Parkland, yeah. Parkland, I have not identified the issues.
There's two separate issues. I mean, there's two separate issues of that. Exactly how would you put such a program really together in a way that's provocative and
Makes it.
and you know, there's a great phrase. It sounds like you might get in on a fortune cookie, but it was actually uttered by a guy named Nikolai Berdyaev, a Russian Eastern Orthodox Christian philosopher. Was picked up by an American philosopher here at UT, a guy named Charles Hartshorne, who was a neo-pragmatist philosopher. And it was be creative and foster creation in others. It's the opposite of being pedantic, and it's being what you're trying to do, which is why the model interest means how do you educate in a way that multiplies the possibilities of the recipient of the education and doesn't reduce them. And I want them not to think like me. I want them to think new thoughts that might be greatly different than me.
Actually, I think Bill raises an interesting point that I put to everybody in this room that, you know, we talk about, yes, let's do digital civil literacy from a young age in schools, but the simple truth is that everybody in this room, we think we're mostly above this stuff, but let's face it, we're all incredibly biased to think that the sort of general opinions that EFF and EFF-Austin advocate on digital civil liberties issues are, quote unquote, the right opinions. And frankly, if we were presented with data indicating that, hey, maybe some of these things we advocate for, like end-to-end encryption, here's some actually huge negatives to consider about it. You know, I'd like to think we'd be open-minded enough to hear the argument, but I know I, frankly speaking, would be very biased against listening to such an argument, frankly, because I'm pretty set in thinking these opinions are right, or I wouldn't be doing this.
I think I have an idea, and this might be something that appeals very naturally to younger generations, is to really play role play. Grab the bull by its horn, play role plays, create several fake accounts, and live your persona, or kind of like create this persona through all of these fake Facebook or different social media accounts, and see what gets thrown at you, and then compare the fake roles that you're playing, and then see, oh, well, it turns out that this one has like a Ukrainian sock puppet that wants to tell me that Hillary Clinton is a cannibal.
It's a great semester-long project for a lot of classes.
And
I also want to do it as a group.
That's a great idea.
I think so.
Because it's modeling the technique I use, which is fake everybody. I have no identity. I do the techniques. There have been a couple here that I've noticed. There's
So this is
one where I
recorded,
get
it's
all of,
everywhere.
where I subscribe to all of this stuff
We have a,
and
yes.
then push it away.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but even if you come up with a great idea that would be wonderful to present in a classroom, getting them to allocate time in like a public school classroom is zero chance. I mean, they can't even get music and anything else into there. They're not gonna set aside, we'll spend an hour a week even teaching you literacy online, you know, unless there's a way to incorporate it into existing curriculum somehow, or to do it outside of the curriculum and entice them to go to it on their own time outside of school, then you can get your message out more.
What if it becomes like a Sputnik situation did to us, right? Like our generation, you know, went to elementary school together, is where I'm pointing to Steve. And what happened was education was ramped up greatly, especially on science and math, because America felt like they were behind in those areas because of the Sputnik and other games.
The context changed.
I used to put this to Lakoff when I'd be out at Berkeley, because he worked on understanding how thinking works. Basically, I'd say the mind, but it's more than the mind, really. It's
Don't think
inside
of an
the
elephant.
mind. So I used to say, there could be a universal rule across galaxies that a civilization only survives if it can figure out how thinking works before it has the ability to destroy itself. What if we get in that emergency situation where your problem is actually faced and solved? What if it's so acute, right, that we have to address it?
Well, you have to get, in Texas, you have to get the politicians to agree to put it in the official textbooks used throughout the entire
That takes
state.
forever.
So that it's
And frankly,
very
I
hard
can
to
already
get that
see,
kind of
as
thing.
great as I thought Ann's idea was, I can already see how if I was going to politicize it and like say that's a terrible idea. It's be like, she's promoting children to learn how to create fake news from a young age. Going on persona spewing misinformation. Like, this is the world we live in now. It's kind of sad, but that's how they'd attack you.
Yeah.
I'd like to get back, and maybe this is off topic, but when a lot of us were growing up, there was the belief in the power of government to do good, to promote the general welfare. I mean, OSHA, EPA, voting rights acts, things, and maybe those, some of those were done by Nixon, they weren't all left.
A shocking number were done by Nixon.
But I mean, starting with Ronald Reagan, government is the problem. Government is our enemy, and it's just been amplified through the Tea Party to Donald Trump. And how do you teach that? And how do you teach? I mean, if you read like Steve Pinker's book on the why violence is decreased, the power of government over the centuries to promote standards and promote order that helped us all live together. I mean, living with strangers is something our brains weren't designed to do over millions of years.
And it's Leviathan, as Pops put it, you know, it's establishing these norms. And I mean, yeah, and I think it ties back to the simplification of the framing, where, sure, government is bad sometimes, it is a problem sometimes, but Reagan turned it into, it's always the problem, in every situation, where evidence, you know, be damned.
Well, let me take a question, but I want to come back to that. Go ahead.
There was a discussion here about how we could go and start instilling this sort of understanding of what we're exposed to. And I think one thing we could do is implement, when people understanding what terms of service and terms and conditions are. I mean, we mostly just click through them, or I try to read it and then I fall asleep. But if we can instill or maybe come up with a modular terms and conditions that gets progressively more complex as you get older, we can have kids learn to understand what they are agreeing to, so they're thinking. And you know, maybe somebody wants to chew on that.
I have two things, because I don't want to leave. I want to get to that, because it's sort of like the umbrella topic ultimately. But I don't want to leave the education idea either. There's simpler things that we could do. So there's mindfulness technologies are awfully like hip these days, but on the other hand, they is teaching people how to watch their thoughts. Mm-hmm. So there is the creation of a space between you and the immediate incoming information. There's a variety of those technologies available in the world, some in fake traditions, some not in fake traditions. It interests me because there is a technology that is employable that seems to give us space between our thoughts to stop and not let one absolutely determine what the next one is, right? So that's something we also might consider as an intervention beginning at an early age. I don't want to get some doctrinaire discussion about it because that happens on this topic. But on the other hand, we know it seems to work in a variety of circumstances.
Meditation in preschools?
Maybe so. They're actually doing it in Washington, D.C. schools to great effect, by the way. But let's just talk about that question in a minute, because one or the other, we're not going to escape the engagement of government in whatever piece of this, whatever solutions we might try to find. I could tell you what I do in presentations, probably not too much effect really, but we complicate what government really is in our lives, really. So here's what politics is. What happened was, we lived in these little huts and we moved around a lot because we had to chase the food, and mostly all of our negotiating was done with families that lived with us, so the people that lived with us in these mobile huts. But then all of a sudden there were more of us and the problems became more acute, so that we had to negotiate with our next door neighbor. We had no choice. So we used the lessons we learned negotiating within whatever kind of family it was, many different kinds. We had to employ those. We created politics. And that's all politics is. It's just a negotiating with other people to address certain opportunities and problems. It's not that complicated. And government is there to execute what we decide politically. Theoretically, that's a very simple model. But over time, a couple of things happen. And one of the most important things to happen is, and it's fascinating to me, that anthropologists, contemporary anthropologists will tell you that everybody needs a little bit of hierarchy, all right, social dominance hierarchy in order to get things done. It helps to have a team leader. It's hard to make decisions by consensus all the damn time. So the hunters had some leader that took them hunting. He ran up to be, or she ran up to be chief of the tribe, but they had these other practices that were almost democratic, in that if that person that was chosen to lead the hunt or whatever began to accrue too much benefit and to be too much of a bully, they toss that person out or take other sanctions against them, right?
Vote of no confidence.
Vote of no confidence. And I mean, it's happening really early. We think that Greece invented democracy. This was happening several thousand years before Greece ever thought of democracy. But look what's happened now. In fact, I mentioned Tom DeLay redistricting. It's an interesting example. The opposite thing is happening. The leaders, once they get in that position, are tossing the people they don't like out. It's upside down. If you solve this passivity problem in terms of information consumption, at the same time, you have to solve that political problem. You have to re-empower people to understand that actually they're in charge.
What are your thoughts on what's been the primary driver of inverting the normal dynamic of checks on the leader's power there?
The primary driver.
If you had to pick one.
Lack of attention. Or tribal emergencies, where all of a sudden you didn't have time to address the bully. You had to get through the tropical storm, right? And you got used to it. Yes?
There's a pretty interesting book on this called Active Liberty by Stephen Breyer, Supreme Court Justice. He makes this definition, I think he borrowed it from somebody else, the difference between the former, he called it ancient, I think, and modern liberty is, ancient was the Greek idea that we have that every person gets a say in their government and that all of these individual viewpoints and choices actually matters. But our modern liberty is this idea that the government is something, this amorphous authority above us, and that modern liberty is the freedom to be let alone. And he, from his viewpoint as a jurisprudential scholar, says that something that he thinks that is a general downward trend in our dissatisfaction with government is the fact that so many people are just fine not being involved at all.
The fact
Even though
that
they hate it.
the fact that
hates it.
the fact that liberty used to mean having the freedom to participate, and it's morphed into liberty means the freedom to not participate.
You and your 18,000 guys.
I would argue that it's impossible to not participate. It's a non sequitur. It can't happen.
Well, yes, even not participating is
Not
a
voting.
choice.
What about the people who don't vote?
Yeah, that's a massive.
Then that's a
the majority
participation of an odd sort, isn't it? You can't check.
You can't not exist. Everything you do is a choice and affects something, including choosing to do nothing.
You're interdependent with the rest of the world, no matter what you do, whether you try to be passive about it or active about it. But I think that's a very well taken point. Another thing that I like with your idea on the education front, this works, should work politically too. But once again, it was the commercial market that thought of this. And it's when I speak to political groups all the time, large and small, and you'd be surprised at how unempowered people can feel. But I've been using an example for quite some time. You may not know this happened to you when you were in line for the newest movie. But Hollywood will make a movie for $50 million, and it'll have a $40 million advertising budget. And $20 million of that $40 million will be spent hiring people around the country to stand in line with you and talk about how great this movie is, and they're seeing it again. Or how like the other movie in the multiplex, it's word of mouth advertising, and they pay a fortune for it. And that's the power of the individual voice. Or I use another example, but you also use in the movies, that you sit in the house at home and you see an ad for a movie and it looks like it's really good, and you want to go see that movie, and you go to work in the morning, and your neighbor's out front and said, "We saw that movie last night, it sucked." And you take the word of that neighbor and you don't go see the movie, if you like the neighbor, right? That's the power of individual communication. It is enormous. You know, we're so
Until movie pass, now they're free.
Movie passes are free?
Well, you're reimbursed the cost of the ticket.
Movie Pass is a service that's like
Oh.
pay X a month, see all the movies you want, basically. It's been getting a lot of press.
Okay.
Yeah. But,
That's gone by me. The point is, in both cases, it is a question of people being educated to their power and culture. It comes naturally just from being there.
It's enculturated.
well, and I think that,
Yeah, I mean, it's not, you have to unlearn it, right?
and I think part of the power of why, quote unquote, fake news and social media is so powerful is it's people we know sharing it. And we are literally wired to trust the word of people in our tribe above all other news sources.
You know, that's an odd phenomenon, dude. I don't do that. All right? Like, I get a lot of links forwarded to me from people I know, and I'm happy that they do, but that doesn't give the link any more credibility than if I found it on my own and went, that's bullshit. Right? So it's hard for me to imagine how that actually, but it does, obviously, it works, doesn't it?
But if somebody in this room sends you a message after tonight and there's a link in it, you're more likely to follow it than getting it from somewhere.
I might click on it, but it doesn't mean I automatically believe that Hillary's accountable.
I mean, I think though that I think we're actually to speak of where you are unlike the average person is that I think it's sort of it's not so much I think that we blindly believe something just because we know. I think it's just most people develop heuristics of trustworthiness that if somebody has always been a source of true news, they'll be likely to believe what that person says. And even if that person sends something that sounds ridiculous, you'll give it more benefit of the doubt because this person's always been right. You know, that's how that means it works for me, this mechanism. Like, if my uncle always shares nonsense, because he's my uncle, I'm not going to listen. But if, like, my friend from work is always telling me things that turn out to be true, he could share Hillary Clinton's accountable, and sure, I might still think it's ridiculous. I'll at least, like, read it, unlike I would with almost anyone else where I'd immediately throw it out and ignore it. So it's time-saving heuristics is how I think it operates.
Isn't that teachable to your normal fifth grader?
Clearly.
Honestly? No, I'm not, I mean, what I'm getting at is, we've had to learn some of this stuff through hard experience over time. It's conceivable to me that it's teachable at a very, very early age.
I like to think.
It may be only teachable at a very early
Good
age.
point.
But will the
Not
not the
just-
homeschoolers?
Will the parents foster that if you're being raised by people that don't want to see beyond that, I guess, mindset, is that teaching going to be nurtured, and will it go away? And that's been my, I guess, the conflict I've had in my mind as we discussed bringing it to education. It's like, yeah, you can teach a kid at school, but like when they go home and they discuss these concepts and apply these concepts, they're going to be contradicting the people that are raising them, which is going to create a whole other conflict. So you're going to have to incorporate teaching, the parents and bringing them into the mindset as well in order for it to be actually successful.
This is beginning to look like a Soviet 5-year plan.
But it does. You raise the point of it. But it raises the point of it. Yeah, the kid goes home and it's like that dang commie government school filling this kid's head full of ideas.
But hold it for a minute. We have two children. These are both extremes. They're obvious extremes, but they are exemplative of where we are. We are either going to legislate large-scale solutions to this collectively, or we're going to do individual empowerment to help people think and live their way through it. There's no other choice. So yeah, there are going to be seeming impossibilities all along the way. There have to be, but what is the alternative?
I'm out the shot. I don't have one.
Oh,
I can think of one. Give me like 5 minutes though.
I am always a little skeptical when somebody says these are the two options. There is no third choice.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe I just haven't thought.
what if I was just trying to be provocative for you?
No, there's the third choice.
It's a very salient, in that we are often shown by our own media or in journalism that there are two choices, only two choices, and there only has to be two choices.
I mean, as a philosopher, I'm a post-structuralist, which is literally that, yeah, we're constantly told there's two choices, and that's never true.
Right.
I was just reading this book on journalism ethics, and this lady got so pissed off about this enforced fair and balanced reporting idea, which isn't like in journalistic standards, it's in people's minds that this is what journalism is supposed to do. And she says, this guy who says, the thing that really bothers me about the fair and balanced reporting is that sometimes only one of the sides is true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a question about your theoretical conundrum as you pose to this.
That hurts.
So, is there one side, are both of these happening at the same time? Is there one side rallying for the legislation and one side rallying for, the individual? Is that like what's happening? Is that?
I'm not even sure it's happening. I mean, I speak of the moment as sort of like direction, really. I think I'm too provocative when I say it's two choices. I mean, what I will say this about that tactic as a speaker, one of the most fruitful approaches to put somebody in a creative mind frame is to confuse them. So in other words, in a good way. I don't mean like, it's sort of like, it's not unlike that chart you showed me for that paper. There's a very productive moment in our lives in which we're really unsure where we are, and it forces us to think in ways we never thought before, or act in
It
ways.
opens us to the optionality of there being other ways to think about things.
And that it's subject to where you are in your own thinking.
And oftentimes there's a lot of emotions involved in this at the moment too. So like I used in some similar settings I did with Lakoff. Like what are those moments? How can I describe those moments? And I use like personal moments, like when I was younger, and there was that one moment: do I kiss her back or not? Right? It's a very serious moment. There's a lot of things going to follow. Or does she kiss me back or not? A lot of things are going to follow from that decision making.
Yep.
But it's a very creative moment in our lives, isn't it? Like,
You're
probably thinking, well, look, she's looking at me like I didn't think about it at all. I don't know. But you get my point. The confusion can be lovely and beautiful and produce very creative things. And that's what we need right now. The collective confusion over this might be the most positive thing we got going for us. And address it.
And that may be the antidote to AI generated news.
Because it can't do that.
Exactly.
It's never confused.
No. Yeah, and even the randomness of the algorithm is going exactly as it's programmed to go. It's never confused.
That's a fascinating, I just love everything that I've read and tried to learn about it, even working with George. And lucky for me, when I worked with George at Berkeley, he introduced me to all kinds of neuroscientists in all different kinds of fields. And I did learn a lot, but not enough to where I could pretend to repeat it to you in any way I find that terribly coherent. But I will say one thing about this happens. You can almost, like between thoughts, right, there has to be a space, or else each thought would determine strictly the next thought. And in that space, which some now say we go into the default mode network, somehow or other, our neurons, in association with our emotions, is searching for an unpredictable answer. And how that works is fascinates the hell out of me.
I mean,
Not for inventions, innovations.
Come out of that space.
I know speaking personally for myself, some of my greatest personal growth has happened precisely when somebody has forced unconventional ways of seeing things in my life upon me, and it literally made it where I had to see those things in different framings than I had seen them. And it's often painful, but after you go through it, you're like, wow, I have a much fuller picture of this situation. More
You can no longer see the world the way you saw it before.
Yeah, you literally can't. That thing you viewed as purely positive, purely negative. It is a more gray thing now.
See, this used to be called, and they did teach it, and they didn't start teaching it until high school age in a lot of places, but it used to be called critical thinking, right? Well, but now we know much more about thinking than we knew when we taught critical thinking. Now, I don't know why we couldn't follow your suggestion and begin elementary teaching of these concepts at a very, very early age, so that the sort of independent thinking, feeling part of human being and becoming is much more natural to future generations.
Well, you
I don't know why we couldn't do it.
You can't standardize test that. There's a reason they prioritize the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's very easy to write tests and you can score on that.
But if we put our money together and put like an after-school program together, where it was, taking some formulas from parents, where they could just dump up the kids and have them learn some really cool stuff, I think that's a way we could use that effectively to do it. And I would contribute something like that.
There's one other option that we could explore, and that is teaching kids that, because we're all storytellers, right? I mean, that is what humans do.
I'd argue it might be the most fundamental thing that makes us human, actually.
Right. That we might want to look at how the role of improv and forcing people to think through their first 4 ideas and settle on the 5th one.
So that's more role playing. That's also
It's all about telling stories and getting better at telling stories.
absolutely.
And not telling the same 2 stories that
Or
we've all been
telling
telling
the
so long that we can't think of any other
Or
story.
telling the story by having everyone in the room contribute a piece.
See, that's another important piece to put on, because the storytelling that's our thing. But there's a downside to storytelling too, a little bit, in that we get so used to the melodramatic storyline, and when A happens and then B happens, so that's the peripeteia, the trouble, Aristotle calls it that, and then the trouble solved, we expect the next thing. We automatically expect it to happen. And if it doesn't happen, and oftentimes we won't see what really happens, our expectations are so high that this is the outcome, and excuse the reference to structure. And the structure of the narrative, that we're what we think happened even if it didn't happen.
Right. Yep.
But understanding that,
Yeah.
that's not hard to understand. In fact, it's a feature of a lot of nursery tales, fairy tales, who don't give you the unexpected ending on purpose. So that's another thing that could go into the textbook of the future that will get through the Texas Textbook Commission without them going there.
I think you actually do tie into an interesting point about the downsides of that. We filter everything through stories. That, frankly, I think a lot of the animus driving some of the toxic elements in our political discourse is that certain people were told via mass culture to have certain ideas of what their own life as a hero's journey would look like, and when those beats aren't hit, they somehow feel that something that was theirs was denied them.
And they're also surprised when those folks that haven't been privileged don't have the same view of that life story.
And they'll do a lot of things to make that story true,
Yeah.
even when it's not. Inhumane things happen just on behalf of stories, but if people understood that, it would be harder to manipulate it into doing it. Which, by the way, there's really nothing that we're talking about that John Dewey didn't write about in his mid-20th century ideas on education. It's one of the reasons that the more authoritarian leaders of the time tossed it out the window as soon as they could get a handle on it. The idea is very experiential, very empowering, not pedantic. People learn by doing. People are exposed to it. People have to create. Right? They're not just given a textbook or a lecture and told to remember it and tested on it, or standardized tested on it, on certain things, right?
That's leading to redesigning high schools. Some of the new high schools that have been built aren't just rows of classrooms. Matter of fact, there's very few classrooms and a lot more is being done out in the open. And in colleges.
I actually think education is more public education is more reformable than we probably think it is. one of the reasons is it's been carried to such a kind of silly with standardized testing and all of the roads we've had over whether you're going to teach, you know, this religion or that religion, not teach this religion or that. I mean, there's been so much attention on it. And also, politically speaking, and I've watched it and worked it in here in Texas for years, it always seemed to the general public that we were talking about the public schools on the other side of town. We're spending too much money on administrators who are administrating these people over there. But all of a sudden, the lack of resources and the silly regulations and the stupid standardized tests have hit the suburbs hard. And they're uneasy about it. Now, the difficulty there is that it also feeds into the school privatization movement, right? So we want to say we're going to fix education, but we don't want to scrap it.
Well, it's been a time-honored tactic of those who reflexively oppose government in all situations, which is make the public service suck, and then it's like, oh, and now here's the private service, and it doesn't suck as much, you know. Even though it was a rigged game of they defunded the public service and made it on purpose.
Well, I don't know how much more time we got.
Well, we have till 9 technically. We have to remember.
But I got to go back to where we started, at least on the subject at hand. It has to do with education. We're going to, one way or the other, we got to give people the information that they have to interrupt the flow of information coming to them and re-examine it. Right? They can't just take it hook, line, and sinker. Then it won't matter so much if the analytics producing this term or that term, and people are somewhat skeptical about both terms and want to reason with the right one on their own if they can. We've got to spread the word about it. You know, we've got to tell people, watch out for it. Yes.
Going back to your, like, do you need a Sputnik moment? Do you need to create a Sputnik moment? Something, take the influence and the way to make it understood better is to push it so far that it breaks people's barriers. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't just get subtly manipulated and I can ignore it. Is purposely push it and manipulate people as much and do as much as you can until somebody finally says, no, that admits that it's happening. And then everybody then comes together on a discussion about it. So is there a point to be made that we should encourage the manipulation until it breaks?
I mean, foreign manipulation and involvement in an election, that's not a Sputnik moment.
But no, there's not enough people, I don't think, that believe that it actually happened.
And I think
there's not enough. There's not the solid proof and
but there's also a lot of people who don't care about what Glenn just said about educating our children to think critically and to think in a more broad way. They want their kids to be taught this way.
And I think this is sort of dancing around, like, to me, what one of the big unanswered questions is we've been spending a lot of time talking about early educational intervention. Is there anything that can be done for quote-unquote lost causes, people who have found their preferred input stream of information and nothing's going to convince them that stream's wrong? Are they lost causes? Is there remediation? There's been a lot of psychological and neurological research that indicates that, backfire effect. You show them evidence they're wrong because they're so emotionally invested in it, they just dig in harder and harder that no, I'm not wrong. Is there a way to combat that?
Yes, it's the answer. There are ways. Different circumstances. I'll give you in the wake of the abuse scandals and the Me Too movement, it's easier to talk about this now than it used to be. But you wondered why politically authoritarian people tend to stick with the object of their desire longer than you imagine that they would. And it's much the same as behavior. It's why the abused person sticks with the abuser. Many of the same reasons, because the world looks totally chaotic to them in a different circumstance because they have so. Yes, it's an it's like a
Stockholm effect.
Well, one thing breaks it. Well, I mean, not just one thing. Generally, one thing breaks it in both circumstances, and it's, for want of a better word, it's shame. It is that moment when the chaos of the unknown is actually preferable because the psychological suffering is too acute and too well known to those around me, right? And so that's just one way that people have those moments. They also have it in far simpler ways. I'll tell you a group that's happening right now. All the people that bought homes in the floodplain by Addicks Dam. They believed the bullshit, and the flood came, and it flooded up to their roofs. And they don't believe it anymore. Even though they probably live next door to one of the builder's guys.
So basically, for Trump supporters to say, abandon him, he would have to do something that would personally, deeply, publicly damage their life in some way.
And we're still waiting to find out whether soybeans is that or something else.
It doesn't have to be that acute, like I put it, right? Like John Kerry came back from Vietnam and opposed the war. He had one of those moments because he saw through it. He was a true believer till that moment. In fact, I didn't go. I was 1 year. You were probably like me, right? The draft ended after I graduated, right after I graduated from high school. But many of the friends that I had that came back all had their eyes opened by it. So it does happen. The point is, yes, you.
I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
So in social psychology, it's not just a tipping point, this point where there's too much information for them to continue believing this thing that is clearly a lie. It's called an affective tipping point, because as you say, it provokes all of these emotional reactions for obvious reasons.
9/11 is one of those. There are things that were impossible to do before 9/11, and after 9/11, they were demanded.
And there were things that used to be possible before 9/11 that are now not possible
That's
anymore.
right.
Watching any old movie and seeing people in an airport is comical these days.
Yeah.
There's other examples. In fact, I got to talk to a lot of them. They were here for the Texas Tribune Fest. Steve Schmidt, the Republican consultant to John McCain. Steve Schmidt, Michael Steele, who was the Republican Party chair. All these people you see, their eyes have been opened, not just to Trump, but to the potential consequences to the institutions and necessary habits of democracy by the trajectory of the hard right. And they've come around. They come around to the point that I would have discussions with them about, it's almost like a new party kind of thing within the parties. It's like, both of us recognize that what's really important is to maintain the institutions of democracy. We have to do that if we're going to have any chance of surviving these moments. So they've gone through similar moments, and the reason to give all those examples is it's not predetermined. They do break. They do come back. We may not know all the ways to bring them back.
I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, I was recently reading something where even like the Koch brothers are starting to wonder if they backed the wrong horse with some of their stuff, because with Trump proposing all these tariffs, they're freaking the hell out about that. And like, oh God, we've created a
What
monster.
hell have we wrought upon ourselves?
Yes.
So when you were talking about encouraging people to disrupt their flow of information and being more critical and forming their own opinions, it sounded a lot like what she was talking about with the kids who are now making their own YouTube videos and talking about dissecting their own news. It just makes me wonder, like, what prompted them to do that? Was it just the fact that they had the platform, or was there something else? How can we recreate it?
I think, so when I went to VidCon, which is like a conference for YouTubers this past summer, and so I went to a lot of different panels, and what a lot of these YouTubers said were that, obviously these are the ones that became famous, so that's just 0.00, very, very few people. But what prompted them to start was that they didn't see people discussed like in the traditional media, which then of course was Disney, Nickelodeon. That was such a vanilla format because Disney has to consider their shareholders. They have to consider that you have some parents who don't want that to be talked about, and some parents don't want that. So you end up with a really sort of vanilla medium. And so a lot of kids that felt like they were sort of different, either transgender or different type of body type or different interest, or just kind of not like the mainstream, they started talking on YouTube, and then they attracted people who felt just like them, and then it kind of grew, and then they grew in popularity. So I think that's another, even though that's a kind of childish way, it was a reaction to the child's world of mainstreaming in many ways.
And I think that's, to me it strikes a somewhat interesting parallel when you were talking about the old means of advertising, and like, they go, everybody in this neighborhood, is a similar way, sort of, that, a lot of these very niche identities, or, people who weren't part of the mainstream, who felt like they didn't belong in the past, they're all geographically separated. So it is not capitalistically profitable to create niche entertainment or news for them. But now the internet is collapse geography, and you can create, in aggregate across the whole country or the world, there's enough of them that there is a market for it. And so the internet lets that happen.
The scary thing on that conversation, right, about YouTube empowering kids is in the news the last couple of days has been a conversation about YouTube collecting data on kids that they're not allowed to do so. And so...
Well, it gets even creepier when you know about that there have been a lot of algorithmically created videos on YouTube, ostensibly for children, that have highly inappropriate content for children in them. Oh, you should look into it. It's very disturbing.
If anything,
I'll share you some stuff. Yes.
Yeah, please.
More disturbing than Rocky and Bull.
Hi, that show is a treasure, sir. You take that.
If you want to take that one step further, Radio Lab yesterday.
That's right, I heard that. Yeah.
Thing about first it started out just being able to mimic AI mimicking a voice. It's some code that Adobe's got called Doco. And it's got a good business case in that when you go out to shoot and you have bad recording, you come back to LA and you're running through the film and some stuff got garbled, you'd have to call in the actor, who could be some other place in the world or whatever, but set things up to record it in the studio. And you probably still have your lips going in the wrong direction. Well, go look that show up there. There's a picture of someone who's talking up here, and the person, the celebrity is talking. Now, at this point, you can sort of see the lips shady, as opposed to if you were looking at me.
Right, they're still telltale digital artifacts.
But the next step of, I think it's like half an hour, the next step was they can do the same thing with Barack Obama and
George W.
Yeah, I
I
seen
saw the one
video.
with Obama.
Yeah, I've seen
And
it where they make it look
it's
like they're
that.
saying anything.
But-
Right.
But the next one was the people, they had to go up to Seattle, and there's a real, University of Washington has got some really neat stuff going there. And two things disturbed me about that when they interviewed the professors is, first of all, they all have not only jobs at the University of Washington, but also like at Google or Facebook. So that means that path is there.
Who's paying for their vacation home? The work at Google.
So finally, they interviewed the one professor and asked about the ethics of all this, and the professor was that complete black. All she liked was the fact she could do this neat stuff.
Yep. Well, again, it's this is a gun, and how you use it is your choice. I was actually, as I was listening to it, I was thinking that you need to listen to that Radio Lab program last night.
Yeah, just to kind of set it straight, I absolutely do believe that this technology can be incredibly. I mean, that's the point. I think the point I was trying to make.
I took the joke in good faith.
Yeah, it's a joke, but it's also the fact that the analytics parts of it, the learning, the acquiring of knowledge to use for the very same tools that are being used to manipulate us. Now it's almost like we have to fight fire with fire because we're already, being.
That's a great example of that, happened in Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So, where the phones were tapped, both Poland and Czechoslovakia. So the secret police knew what everybody was doing. So the Samizdat, which was the sort of banned publications that everybody from philosophers to poets used, political papers, called Samizdat, they sent it by fax. It wasn't traceable. So they used that technology, which is part of the phone system, to their advantages for liberation purposes.
Yeah,
So we can't look that
Well,
way.
that reminds me of one thing I read that I just thought was amazing. It was apparently in old Soviet Union, the way they would smuggle in banned contraband American music records is they would embed the encoding for the records inside the discarded X-rays, actually, of all things. And that's how they'd smuggle them
And
in.
we can remember when Facebook was being used by the Arab Spring too.
Yeah, and Twitter as well.
Could have
And
gone. Could have gone.
yeah, and you know, but the two people that really like us are really getting to the thing that keeps me up at night about fake news and everything, which is in a few years there's going to be people sending and sharing all over the internet deceptive, doctored videos of big public political figures apparently saying terrible things, and it's going to look and sound real.
Well, they've already got the girl from Parkland tearing up the Constitution.
And that's just a very good Photoshop, you know. That's just a good Photoshop.
Well, let me try and put a ball down there.
Yes, we have 5 minutes, so yes, we need to wrap it up.
The first thing is this sort of tug of war between resistance, the struggle for freedom, and authority, and the struggle for control is forever. There is no resolution to it. It's a matter of relative strength at any moment in history. And in fact, not to take any of the energy out of it, we need more energy always on the side of freedom. But we didn't remember that any answer we come up with is going to be contingent and tentative, and not one that we want to impose on others necessarily in some kind of unequal way. That said, it also means that we don't have to look for the utopian answer. We can use an utopian vision to help us move forward in time if we need it. That's, you know. But on the other hand, we don't need to achieve it to say solve this immediate problem, which you just put in mysterious form. What do we do when the world is covered up with absolutely fraudulent, unbelievable imagery that's inescapable? Well, there are ways we will find ways to resist that, right? That facilitate human freedom. I don't have any doubt about it.
I mean, as a software person, I already can think of certain things one might try. Probably cryptographic signing and verification of all media sources, and actually having that publicly viewable easily and not hidden in the metadata is going to become more needed than ever. You can even have browsers verify that yes, this video has not been manipulated in some way.
Mozilla is your friend.
But will the browsers do that? That's the thing. Do they have any interest in doing that?
Somebody like Mozilla might, or Brave potentially. Of course, then it runs into the problem that the whole internet has right now, which is it all runs on trust certificates. But what do you do then when it turns out VeriSign's been committing mass fraud? You know, it's turtles all the way down. You have to trust somebody.
And then you throw in the lack of net neutrality, and you kind of like you have this tiered system. If that takes effect, then all the crap news becomes free because it's sponsored.
And it's popular because the algorithms drove it to be popular, the analytics drove it to be popular. So it's the stuff that isn't affected by the net neutrality bans.
But maybe it speeds up the movement away from it. Maybe these kids that already don't like it, you stick them in that the free tiered stuff. They go, the hell with this. Well, one thing about it won't be hip, right? You can guarantee that, right? Once you have this sort of like trash free bottom of the tiered net, it won't be hip. Nobody will want to hang out with it.
Nobody wants to appear cool is going to be there.
So maybe it's going to produce its own resistance that way.
That's true. But I mean, it still might get those segments that vote for Trump. I don't know. But not the kids. I don't think the kids would go there. I don't know. But you're right. I think maybe that's a way to kind of slice it out.
Well,
I learned a lot. Thank you for your focus group.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much, Will. This is actually the best discussion we've ever had. I want to thank you. And just to put a bow on this, everyone, we usually, those of us who are interested after the meetup, we'll go next door to Firehouse Lounge and get a drink talk for a little bit. So if anybody's interested in that, we'll be going over there in a minute. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
We're not quite a deal of intellectual debate about that issue. How's going all right?
We graduated 72.